You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host, author, and occasional misanthrope, Juliette Miranda. Go to theunwritablerant.com and you can subscribe on iTunes or connect with the show on Facebook and Twitter.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda. Welcome to episode 93 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. It is that time again, folks. Grab yourself a glass, fill it up, and join me in a toast. Cheers, y'all. Yum. Today, I am drinking Jefferson's ridiculously small batch bourbon. And I am sharing this bourbon with y'all because it is in that sweet spot. It is perfectly delicious at an absolutely wonderful price point. Now, as far as I am concerned, Jefferson's can do no wrong. And this very small batch bourbon demonstrates why I feel that way. Now, this is a blended bourbon. It's 4 different straight bourbon whiskeys, and that means we're not going to have a mash bill, and we're not going to have an age statement. But because this is a very small batch bourbon, that gives Jefferson's the opportunity to really fine-tune the flavors. And the result is amazing. Now, if you are a seasoned whiskey drinker, I will say this isn't going to blow you away. That's not to say it's not delicious. I would actually consider this an intermediate bourbon, perfect for someone who is ready to make that step up from Maker's Mark, but doesn't really want to get out of their comfort zone just yet. At just shy of 90 proof, this bourbon is so light and very easy to drink. Right up front, it is incredibly fruity. But then, as you drink it, it kind of mellows out and you get that perfect symphony of vanilla and caramel and definitely honey. And if you're somebody like me with this low proof, it means that you're probably going to go through an entire bottle of this bourbon within a weekend. So I think it's about high time I get started drinking. Hang on, y'all. So, last weekend, my guy and I traded our driveway for a rooftop. Our rooftop of choice belongs to a tapas restaurant in one of our favorite suburban downtown areas. And it always feels ridiculous to me to use the words suburban downtown together, but I don't really have a better description for this area. It's blocks and blocks of trendy stores and mediocre bars, and then right in the middle of it is our favorite restaurant. They are kind enough to let us sit on their roof for hours on end, randomly ordering food, but mostly just drinking sangria. Oh, and sangria is a creeper. It's one of those cocktails that you can drink all day long, but between the sugar and the fruit, you never really realize how much alcohol you've put back until you decide to get up. I couldn't really tell you how many glasses of sangria my guy and I sucked down, but what I do know is that when our bill came, it had 2 line items, one for food and one for booze, and one total was significantly higher than the other. That left my guy and I up for anything but calling an Uber to take us home. So we just kind of tumbled out onto the sidewalk and debated our options. The biggest problem with these little downtown areas is that while they are littered with bars, they're not exactly set up for drunks. At least, not during the daylight. We were caught in that weird sort of witching hour that lands between 4 and 8 p.m., when it's too soon for dinner, but too early for entertainment. Sure, we could have gone shopping, and it would have been fine, because it's true that some of our best purchases have happened while we were under the influence. That's how we happened to acquire a life-size stuffed otter and a wine pour shaped like the salmon of knowledge. But we were far too restless for shopping, so we decided to wander on down to the Riverwalk. It would seem that every Midwestern town has a Riverwalk, and if you've ever seen one, you've seen them all. This particular Riverwalk had the distinction of some historic covered bridge and a small amphitheater, but really, it was completely and utterly lacking amusement. Which may be why I took it upon myself to liven things up a little bit and engage my guy in a little game that we like to call Fetch the Flip-Flop. The object of this game is incredibly simple. You just wrench the flip-flop off your opponent and fling it away from them. You can award yourself meaningless points for creativity in the throw, or how annoying it is for your opponent to retrieve their shoe. This is a game we will play anywhere and anytime booze is involved. Kind of the same way people play Frisbee. But unlike Frisbee, Fetch the Flip-Flop is centered around devious intentions and malicious joy. For me, though, it's the element of surprise that I like the best, and I totally use it to my advantage. My guy and I had just settled down on a bench in the sunshine when I landed on him like a buzzard on a carcass. I ripped the sandal off his foot, waved it in front of his face for a moment, and then I tossed that sucker right into the stands of a Shakespeare in the Park performance. Really, my guy asks, we're gonna play this game? Yeah. Last time we played Fetch the Flip-Flop was in Aruba, and my guy declared victory when I had to fish my flip-flop out of some unsuspecting woman's beach bag. And me, ever the poor loser, later retaliated by hurling one of his sandals off the side of a dock. Needless to say, we go through a lot of flip-flops in the summer. I was feeling rowdy and didn't have any other ways to burn off my 4-hour sangria buzz, so my guy had to resign himself to our wacky little game. Let me be clear here. I'm making it sound as though he was an unwilling participant, but that is not the case at all. He may never admit to it publicly, but my guy loves this game and he plays to win. To the casual observer, Fetch the Flip-Flop may more resemble aggravated assault between Dumb and Dumber than a game played by a husband and wife. That's just how we roll. After he retrieved his shoe from the Midsummer Night's Dream performance, my guy took off after me, chasing me down a grassy knoll and knocking me onto my back. I managed to pull off one of my flip-flops and was whacking him over the head with it when my guy caught my other ankle and pulled the remaining shoe from my foot. And in one fluid motion, my shoe went sailing over my head, past the sidewalk, and directly into a flock of Canadian geese. Are y'all familiar with these winged demons? The internet is ripe with stories about their reign of terror, of how they steal sandwiches from children and chase pit bulls off their turf. But that's not even the half of how combative these wannabe dragons are. There had to be 10 or 12 of them gathered along the riverbank, their plump bodies concealing layers of muscle and hearts of stone. My flip-flop sat in the middle of the gang, a purple projectile in a sea of feathers and hatred. So now, of course, my guy is stupid with laughter. He is on the ground clutching his sides. He finds this whole scenario so funny. And by his rules, this was a winning throw. I could have conceded defeat, I could have. But damn it, I wanted my flip-flop back. Well, I figured my best approach with the geese would be the same as it was with my guy. I'd just rely on the element of surprise to infiltrate the gaggle, snag my shoe, and make a break for it before they could overtake me and peck my eyes out. But those goddamn geese, they are clearly onto me as I parrot them from behind a tree. Those waddling little fuckers were totally reading my mind. And hand to God, I swear, they actually started to fan out in a strategic attack formation around my flip-flop. Well, that worried me a little bit. I decided to change my tactic and instead channeled my inner Dr. Dolittle. I've seen my guy do it hundreds of times, in the driveway, at the zoo, and most often it resulted in him making a new furry friend. I mean, hell, I once saw him befriend an armadillo. So how hard could it be for me to charm a couple of geese? I attempt to put on a soft, soothing voice, which isn't entirely easy to do when you're being stared down by 24 eyes, all hungry and looking for blood. So I'm creeping my way in, and I'm going, "Hey guys, I don't want any trouble here. Just gonna grab my flip-flop, leave y'all alone. Don't stop what you're doing, it's all good." And I start to inch my way onto their turf. My head is down, I am acknowledging their dominance, and I start to slowly reach for my shoe. The leader of the goose gang responds in fury, but it doesn't honk. It doesn't squawk or bleat or make any of the usual sounds associated with his species. Instead, it hissed. That waddling little fucker hisses at me as if it's part cobra, spitting goose venom in my direction and spreading its wings. And the others, they all followed suit. And the next thing you know, I've got 12 geese coming at me in a half-run, half-flight. I tear off down the path, my one bare foot slapping on the sidewalk and connecting with every single pebble in its path. I will tell y'all that folklore and mythology, they tell tales about the monstrous hounds of hell, but I am here to say that those stories have it all wrong. Those so-called hounds of hell, they're not hounds at all. They're geese. Well, the geese eventually halt their pursuit, leaving me panting and shoeless and hysterical. They return to their little gathering around my flip-flop, and just for good measure, 2 of them take a crap in it. I really needed a cocktail. Sadly for my guy, a chick flapping around in just a solo flip-flop isn't as common of an occurrence in this sleepy little suburb as it is in places like New Orleans. That meant he was forced to head into the nearest designer store and purchase me some fancy new sandals. Because goddammit, I may have lost that particular game of fetch the flip-flop, and admittedly some of my dignity, but I sure as hell wasn't about to lose out on the opportunity for some new shoes. And with that, I am raising up my glass and drinking to my new favorite sandals, which will never be entered into a game of fetch the flip-flop. Hang on, y'all. This bourbon is just so easy to drink. I love it. Y'all, I've done a little bit of thinking since last week. If you will recall, I talked about how I shoved my first crush sailing into a pile of gravel when he publicly dissed me. Although I couldn't have known it then, that action was the start of a horrifying trend that continued through the better portion of my life. Much as I hate to admit it, I am lousy at breakups. In fact, I think it's safe to say I have been just as crazy, if not a little more so, than many of the wackos I talk about on this podcast. But I'm not even sure if it's possible to have a clean, normal breakup. I mean, really, how many of y'all have done that? Have you ever just ended a relationship and went about your life without losing your mind and, say, setting something on fire? In all of my relationship history, I think my worst breakup behavior happened when I was in my later 20s, and I was dating a guy that I will call the Dreamcatcher. He had the tremendous misfortune of meeting me just as I had decided I was done with dating, done with messing around, and done with women. I wanted to settle down and have a real relationship. The Dreamcatcher was everything I wanted and more. He was thoughtful and intelligent. He had a lucrative career and a band. I mean, that's like crack in my greedy little hands. I really couldn't say what exactly he saw in me. Likely a reasonably smart chick with a drawer full of condoms, but he treated our relationship like a Williams-Sonoma catalog. Everything we did was blindingly perfect and choreographed. From strolls along the lakeshore to candlelit dinners, to, no lie, a picnic on a deserted mountain in the Caribbean. He was all about the illusion of a relationship. Unfortunately, over the course of a year, I was so busy falling in love with the fantasy that he created, I never stopped to consider the reality, which was, to put it bluntly, shitty. The more I fell for him, the more it became clear that he wasn't nearly as invested in me as I was in him. For starters, I was not the picture-perfect girlfriend that he seemed to want. And it was hard because I could always see the exhaustion in his eyes every time my outfits didn't live up to his expectations or I had a bad hair day. If I ever happened to skip the gym in favor of cheese fries, he would just sigh slowly as if he were thinking, "Oh, you were just so close to perfect." And beyond that, he never met any of my friends or family. Every time I attempted to schedule something, he would wind up working late or getting sick. Or, the one time he was supposed to have dinner with my parents, he called me to tell me that some great-great-aunt had all too conveniently kicked the bucket. And over time, it started becoming clear that we could never actually see each other spontaneously. All of our dates had to be scheduled at least a week in advance, And he never wanted me to come to any of his band's shows. Like, ever. So there's all of this weirdness building up, and I'm starting to suspect that something is up, and I'm ready to call him on it. So the big turning point comes about 2 weeks before the 4th of July. My plan was to hopefully spend the holiday weekend with him. He, however, had other plans. It was a dinner party, he said, for work colleagues and some close friends. As his supposed girlfriend, I didn't qualify as either. And he suggested instead we have our own fireworks the following week. Now, I was hopelessly in love, but that did not make me an idiot. Our picturesque dates with home-cooked meals and sex by a roaring fire had kind of been changing over time into takeout and blowjobs. And I'd had enough. It was time he start treating me like a real girlfriend. Not a picture in a magazine, not an illusion, a real girlfriend. Oh, and my ultimatum did not sit well with him. And he suggested we take some time off from each other to think things over. I don't like ambiguity. I'm a pragmatic kind of gal, and I told him as much. So I asked, do you want to be with me or not? I wasn't exactly prepared for him to say, I guess not. So I went home that night and I cried myself to sleep. But the next morning, I woke up bright-eyed and completely delusional. I wasn't about to let a whole year of my life end quite so quickly, and I went about calling the Dreamcatcher every couple of hours or so to suggest that we not be so hasty in our decision-making. He wasn't a confrontational kind of guy at all, so he never returned any of my calls or emails, which, in my deranged little brain, signaled that he was uncertain. I just figured he couldn't handle his feelings, and it was up to me to make things right. Y'all, this is where I made a decision that to this very day I regret. An awful decision. One that I hate to think about, let alone even admit to. But here it is. I invited myself to his 4th of July dinner party. And what's more, I baked a cake. Ugh. I cannot even begin to explain why I thought this was a good idea. Why I believed that the very sight of me standing on his doorstep with a beautiful handmade cake would suddenly change his entire being and make him believe that I was the one woman that he was destined to be with for all of eternity. But that's what I thought, and that's why I spent 7 fucking hours baking and decorating a 4-layer cake. It was his favorite. Chocolate with a dark chocolate ganache filling and fondant topping. Of course, it kind of tilted to one side, and the fondant was just a little bit lumpy, but it was a masterpiece of my love. He had to recognize that. I packed it all up, leaving my sanity behind, and drove the hour ride into the city to his apartment. He had one of those gorgeous Chicago lofts, impeccably decorated and featuring a massive balcony overlooking the lakefront. The doorman recognized me, buzzed me in without question, and allowed me and that cake to travel up 10 stories to the Dreamcatcher's door. My heart was pounding. I'm standing there in front of his door, and I see the numbers just staring me in the face. And I'm giving myself a little pep talk. I'm saying, you got this, you can do this, he's gonna love it. So I do my best to foof my hair and arrange the cake in my hands to look as perfect as can be, and knocked on the door. I was sure he would be overwhelmed at my thoughtfulness. Well, he opened up the door, and I gotta say, he did not look happy to see me. He took one look at the sloppy cake and the overeager grin on my face, and he just said no. He didn't want to hear my thoughts. He didn't want to talk about it. He just said no. To me and to the cake. My cheeks are burning red. Every single pore on my body is buzzing, and I immediately realize the horror of what I have just done. Every single conceivable emotion is just flooding over me, and it overtook me, and I don't know exactly what happened next. I couldn't tell you what I said to Dreamcatcher. I don't know what he said to me, but I do know what I did. I hurled that cake right at his perfectly painted hallway wall, splattering chocolate and frosting and fondant against the soft sage coloring. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I tore off down the hallway, ducking into the emergency stairwell and setting off the fire alarm in the process. I had to sneak out the back door just to avoid being seen by security. Y'all, that was not my finest moment. You would think that that would be the end of it, that Dreamcatcher and I would both be so mortified by my behavior we would never speak again. But relationships, even illusionary relationships, they're a little tough to sever sometimes. Dreamcatcher actually called me up a couple of days later, apologized for hurting me, and suggested that he come on over to my place to talk it over. Go ahead, take a wild guess what happened when he came over. Of course we didn't talk about anything. We didn't explore the depths of our feelings or consider the ramifications of our actions. We just had sex. Body-shaking, clothing-ripping sex that put me right back where I was before the relationship had ended the first time. As for the Dreamcatcher, he never called me again. This time, I decided I wasn't going to get emotional about our breakup. I was going to do something practical to get over him. I decided I needed a new guy to take my mind off things. So it only made sense for me to start sniffing around his bandmates. If there is one cardinal rule that all good groupies and band gals try to follow, it's this: never date more than one guy in a band. It doesn't matter if it's a national band or some shitty little local band like Dreamcatcher's was. The principle remains: you get one guy per band. I can't say that I cared a whole lot about principles or morals or really much of anything at that point. I wanted someone to make me forget Dreamcatcher, and I wanted to give him the finger in the process. Little did I know that good bandmates know when a chick is out for a revenge relationship, and they'll act accordingly. The guitar player turned me down, the bassist turned me down, even the fucking drummer turned me down. That left me with the lowest rung on the musical food chain, the rhythm guitarist. Y'all, a rhythm guitarist is essentially the organ grinder of a band. A guy who got on stage only because he has 2 more strings than the bassist. But I wasn't in a position to be choosy, and since we were both equally obsessed with the lead singer, it seemed a choice match. Never mind the fact that we had 0 in common. Never mind that he had a thing for chewing tobacco. We both wanted to prove ourselves as worthy to the Dreamcatcher, and hooking up seemed the best way to do it. So of course, when the band had its next gig, rhythm guitar player and I showed up hand in hand. Dreamcatcher definitely looked surprised, I'll say that much. But as rhythm guitarist and I sat there sucking face and groping each other in a backstage broom closet, Dreamcatcher's look kind of turned to disgust. And I don't blame him. I can see it all now. He was disgusted at me for being so ridiculously pathetic and devoid of any self-respect, and disgusted at rhythm guitarist for being such a bottom-feeding dick. And after soundcheck, Dreamcatcher made his feelings known. He walked up to me and rhythm guitar guy, shook his head, and looked right at me. "I hope you'll be happy with Malcolm Young," he said. At the time, I didn't know exactly what he meant by that, but I could tell by his tone it wasn't anything good. And rhythm guitar player guy confirmed my suspicions by attempting to slug the Dreamcatcher. Oh, fists went flying. Unfortunately, none of them actually connected with anyone, and their bandmates broke the fight up way too quickly. They pried those 2 apart, and I was hustled out into the audience to think about what I'd done. They took the stage a couple of minutes later, and it was a mess. Rhythm guitar guy was off in the shadows, spitting chew into a cup, and Dreamcatcher was preening in the spotlight. They were both glowering at each other from opposite sides of the stage like a couple of rabid possums. And then there was me. Somewhere between that attempted punch and the first chorus of their opening song, I found my senses. I realized that I would never be the perfect girl that Dreamcatcher wanted, and Lord knows I wasn't interested in slumming it with a rhythm guitar guy. I may have been something of a mess right then and there, but I was finally ready to work it out with the only person that mattered. Me. So I grabbed my purse, wrote out a quick note on a cocktail napkin, and dropped it at the Dreamcatcher's feet as I walked out the door. It said, "You two are welcome to each other. P.S. I'm sorry I threw a cake at your wall." And with that, I am raising up my glass in apology to Dreamcatcher and in celebration of eventually coming to terms with my perfectly messy self. Cheers, y'all. Oh, there's my bourbon. Speaking of, my guy and I are going to be making a little trek down to Tennessee. We've got stops in Louisville and the Bourbon Trail, and of course, Nashville planned for ourselves. We leave in just a couple of days, but if you have any suggestions about places we need to visit, hit me up on Twitter and let me know. And definitely keep an eye on my Twitter feed and on my Instagram page because I will be posting photos of all of our glorious adventures. And now I've got some trip planning to do and a little bit more bourbon to drink. But don't worry, y'all. I may be traveling, but I will be back with a brand new episode for y'all next week. And now I'm out. Cheers, y'all.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. You can hear new episodes of The Unwritable Rant on radiovegas.rocks every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern and on IPMNation.com on Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and hear best of episodes every weekday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweet as taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.